Hi, my name is Christina Vestey, and I'm reaching out from Sydney, Australia. I have to say, I wasn't anticipating being 14,000 miles away, but I'm just really grateful that I can be here and to join you all. When Tessa and Neil sent out the theme for Holocon 2022 of sustained success in disruptive times, it just felt so relevant, so timely, and so necessary for us to have these conversations together. I think the world right now feels quite heavy with disruption. And I think many of us would agree that the systems that are operating aren't sustainable. I think as industrialized nations, we have pushed the planet to tipping point. And we are at a real turning point, not only with the environment, but I also feel with humanity. And I think we have also created a huge amount of fragility within humanity. Even so, right now we face a global mental health crisis of endemic proportions. And I think one looks at it's not the environment or that humanity is broken. It's the relationships to the planet and to humanity that are broken. And I do feel that really, when we look at sustaining life, it's really the relationships that we create that is so vital. And I want to share my screen with you. And I'm sharing a landscape. Sorry. This landscape is very dear to me. It's a landscape that the sand has carried the footprints, and the landscape has held the memories of 4 generations of my family. But it has also held the footprints and the memories of countless others for thousands of years. And I really feel that that is what's so vital. It's not the relationships that we see necessarily, but it's all that we don't see that holds so much. And I think now, if we really want to start looking at possible systems that are sustainable, I think it's time as industrialized nations that we need to step aside, because we have only created chaos. And yet there are sustaining systems that have managed to exist amidst all possible disruption and have existed for millennia and continue to exist today. And those are our indigenous cultures. They account for 5% of the world's population, and yet they protect 80% of the world's biodiversity. And whilst I'm not Indigenous and these are not my stories to share, I think there are, amongst the Indigenous cultures, there are universal principles that are at play. And I believe that if we start listening and learning from these Indigenous cultures, we have the potential to create sustained success. 11 years ago, I started an organization in South Africa. And really, I think this organization has, when I have aligned myself to the sort of the universal principles, it has led to a sense of abundance. And I think that when we look at abundance and we look at universal principles, it really starts with mutual respect. And when my organization, when we started, it was really to give interest-free loans to girls for their tertiary education so they could go to university. And there were loans. And for me, it was very important that it was a hand up, not a handout. And a lot of people were like, Christina, these young women are coming from such challenging financial situations. Wouldn't it be just better just to give the money? And, and I thought, no, because if there are the right support systems in place, there's no reason why these girls would not be able to complete their degrees, they would be able to pay back their loans. And in that, paying it forward and actually giving the same opportunity to another young woman. And for me, it was also that case of actually believing in these young women and saying, we can do this. It's you. I believe in you. I believe in your dreams. I believe in your goals. And so that's what we started out with, was a student loan, an expenses loan, and the support structure that we thought would be, in place, would be good in place, would be mentor support, some connecting them to employment and work experience and trainings. But that was really like the surface. And I really needed to engage and develop a relationship with these young women, because it's something that I hadn't really understood before I went. I'd never been to South Africa before. And actually my plan was to take it to India, but I had the opportunity to start a pilot project there, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. But the one thing that I hadn't really sort of grasped was the constant disruption that these young women were living in. And that was something that, for example, just to give you an idea of the sort of disruption that I'm talking about, a number of these, and this is a photo of the first cohort, a number of these young women had been the head of their household at the age of 13. They were orphans, where they had to look after their siblings, get their siblings fed to school, and eventually they've got themselves to university. But also many of them, I'd say 90% of them, had experienced extreme sexual violence. Some had had children with their violators, from their violators, and their general situation was really fragile, and there was a lot of loss. A lot of them lost their family members at various times, and there was this constant sense of disruption. And I think that was something that really, seeing this, it really made me realize, okay, the trust that we have here is going to be so important. And I think this is something that we can all learn in times of disruption. It's the trust that we build. It's that engagement, that's having the courage to question, and to question more deeply, and not to just take the surface for granted. And also to listen, to take that step back and just listen, to reflect collectively, and then to adapt. And I do feel what happened is that, when you have that mutual respect, when you have that trust, in actual fact, despite the disruption, there is a fluidity, and you can navigate the disruption and adapt. And I think this is something that these young women really taught me. And we, it was after the next year, we wanted to actually really sort of like come together with these young women and see what was it that we could do together. What was it that we could actually create as a community? So we went off for a weekend, and one of the afternoons they were sitting in a group, and they were in different groups, 5 or 6, and then they sort of wrote down what they would like to do, and they all came back, and we looked at what everyone had said. And it was quite interesting because they'd all said the same thing. And that was that they wanted to give back to their communities. And that always really touched me because these girls were coming from very challenging financial situations. They were coming from very challenging social situations. It would have been so easy to say, we don't have enough. We want more. But that wasn't even in their thinking. Their thinking was about what can we reciprocate? What can we give into our community? And I think that for me, just sort of like highlighted what we're doing. You know, I'm not sure that in the education systems that we have, where youth are actually taught, rather than sort of like, it's not about how well you do, it's how well we do as a collective. It's like, what can we give to one another? What can we share? And not as a point of giving back, but actually that this reciprocity is built in. And I think that was also something that the girls understood with the loan program. For them, it made sense. Of course, they wanted to give somebody else the same opportunity. That was just integral to their thinking. And so we came around and decided, okay, what can we do? You know, what can we do as a collective? And what can you give back to your communities? And we worked out, okay, mentoring, and going into the schools and mentoring young women who will one day potentially be in their situation. And so two of the girls came up to me and said, Christina, you must meet this woman, Nikki Florence. She's been amazing, and she's really sort of transformed our lives. And I think she would be the best teacher for us to learn how to mentor. So I got in touch with this Nikki Florence. I was in Switzerland, she was in South Africa, and we started working together over many long conversations about creating this mentorship program in schools. And we trained the students, and here are some photographs of the mentoring that we had done. And I think the one thing that also transpired, and this is the thing about when you have reciprocity in integrated, is that whilst these girls were giving to the students and mentoring the students and inspiring the students, what came back to them was that they realized within themselves how far they had traveled, and that their voice did matter, and who they were did matter and made a difference. And I want to share with you a conversation. It's a part of a conversation. Unfortunately, it's not a video because the quality wasn't good enough, but with one of the ex-students, Non Klankla, and I had this recently, a conversation with her recently, and she's now working for corporation Accenture, and I really wanted to, we were talking, I was interviewing her, but I also wanted to ask her, what was her motivational push? And this is what she has to say.
Motivational push is myself. All that I've been through is the push, because I know where I come from. I can see where I am now. And I am a very, very big motivation to my community. I'm an example to many youngsters, and many of them look at me as their role model. So giving up won't just shut my dreams, won't just put an end to my journey, but it will affect many that are still growing. It will affect many that aspire to be like me. So obviously, if I give up, they'll also lose hope. So I'm not only pushing for myself, but for my community as well, showing them that, yes, it is possible. Yes, it can be done. And definitely, we're going to push because we deserve greatness. We're too beautiful to just give up. And poverty, it's just not our middle name.
And I think that for me, it's so interesting, you know, that sense of reciprocity, it is integrated. 10 years later, not 10 years, but 5 years later, Nonklankla, with everything that she's doing, it's with her community in mind. She knows that her success is their success. And that everything that she does is referred back to her community. And I think that's something that this, you know, it's not just about mutual respect, it's also about reciprocity, what we can feed back into systems. And not at the point of giving back, not when we feel that we are secure in our situation, but actually integrated into our systems from the very beginning, that the systems won't function without it. And they don't function without it. because when we don't have reciprocity, when we don't have feedback into systems, we're always running at a deficit. And that's where I think, what happens when systems are designed to be exclusive, this sense of lack versus abundance. What have we created? And I think when we do exclude, it is very natural that we will create a monoculture. And monocultures have very little health. They're not healthy systems, and they are running on deficit. And yet when you have diverse systems, and when you have all of these different nutrients coming in and all different inputs, you suddenly find you're in a place of abundance. And I think I had with these young women, and that was the most amazing thing actually with this organization that I run. The beginning was that really we were smaller than a grain of sand, literally. But these young women made me feel like it was a river of possibilities, that we could achieve anything. Yeah. There was never a sense of what we don't have, what's not there. It's no, let's find out what's there, because there is so much, even though we may not be able to see it. And well, one experience that I had, and I think this is also about listening and seeing the gaps. When we were running this mentoring program and what have you, and I was meeting people in different companies to try and get the girls employed, and trainings and work experience, and just different conversations I was having. There was something that kept on coming up. And I'm not saying it came up a huge amount of times, probably maximum 5 times, but it was enough to stand out. And we're talking about young women and education and access to education and what have you. And in all different circles, I heard, well, if you're a young woman coming from the trans sky, you've got no hope. And I thought, well, I didn't know about the Transkei. It was a particular area in South Africa. But I thought, gosh, imagine you come from a place where you have only known unemployment, where you have only seen a sense of that financial struggle and social disruption, where you haven't seen anything else. So you don't even dare to dream. You don't even dare to imagine that you could have dreams and goals, because this is what you know, and nobody else has ever shown you something else. And it just sat so deeply with me, and I thought, no, I want these girls to know, these young women to know that they are here for a purpose. They do have a voice. Their voice matters. They matter. And what they dream matters. And so I decided that a lot of the girls on our loan program were from urban communities, from the townships, from the informal settlements around Johannesburg. And I really sort of wanted to have this sort of like rural urban exchange. So these young women from both environments would see that they had a lot to share with one another, that perhaps they would see themselves reflected in one another and their stories. And I just felt that there would be, for both sides, something very meaningful. Unfortunately, we didn't get to the Transkei, but we went up to an area called Venda, to a village called Makuba, and we were then also down in Limpopo. And you can see this was the buses and the girls. There were 20 of us, and I decided that it would be very interesting to film this as a documentary short. I didn't know what conversations were going to arise. I didn't know what these young women were going to say. But what really I felt was that their voices needed to be heard, and that their stories mattered. And I think this is something which really sort of strikes me as we are missing out on so much potential. We are missing out on these young women or men. It's people who do not fall into this monoculture that we've created. And yet there is the space, and there is so much abundance. There is so much knowledge, so much wisdom, so many ideas and creativity. And I just don't know how we can think we can afford as humanity to exclude. And something that really sort of stood out with me, and this is again when we look at relationships and we look at our environments, is not to see just what is, but to see what isn't there. And through these workshops that we were having and the conversations, and it was the first time that these girls had ever shared their stories. And so what really struck me was the silence. It was the silence that these girls had been sitting with for so long. And so I, thought, what can we do? These girls are in very rural communities. They're not able to talk with really one another in their communities. So we set up what we call Girls Talk groups, where we could support conversations in their communities. And I also felt that actually South Africa has the highest number of mobile phone usage per capita. And I thought, well, if all of these young women have these mobile phones, then let's do an online community with a safe space where girls can receive information that is just straight up about the challenges that they're facing, the issues that they have, and also to create a safe space where we could have these conversations. And so we ended up setting up a platform called Girls Talk, and today that is now She Evolves. And I was recently having a conversation with Yasmin Lahunla, who works with me part-time. I'd interviewed her when she was working for Al Gore's Climate Reality Project, and she's a brilliant young woman, but she really sort of, I want you to hear the conversation, because I think she puts a very clear perspective on what it means to be excluded. And I'll just share that with you now.
I found myself in a space where, because I am doing my doctorate and my speciality is international law, international human rights law, with a bit of climate change as well. And I go to conferences, I go to events, I attend lectures, and what I noticed instantly is that there isn't a lot of people of color. So apart from the fact that there are almost no Black people, but no Black women are there, and it got me thinking, and it got me a bit upset because it's like where are all the Black women? Like, where are we in these spaces? Our voices matter. What's going on? And I thought, yeah, I mean, representation has its challenges, but how are Black women, how are they going to find themselves on the table if even representation isn't something that they're afforded? So in general, we don't necessarily have all the opportunities that we should have due to many circumstances, socioeconomic issues, just a lot of circumstances. But now the system itself, like you spoke just now, isn't even incorporating that one thing that could potentially get us up onto that table, and that's just representation. Personally, and I know I'm probably going to be criticized for this in many ways, but I would rather see a Black woman scholar who doesn't necessarily know everything about a specific field, but just because she's there and she looks like me and she's trying her best. For me, I would enjoy that lecture more than all the white old men that I've been seeing for the past, I don't know how many years. And yeah, those are just like my challenges. The fact that a lot of Black women, and including myself, where I would just decide not to put myself on the table, like what my professor said. It's just, you've got the opportunity, but go, jump, go onto the table. But something in me stops me from doing that. And the other thing is representation. It's like, am I even given that representation opportunity to show face? Am I? And just to hop onto that regarding the first issue about, not jumping into these opportunities, just going back to myself and, my personal journey in this climate change space and in this academic space, I realized I've been very fortunate. I've been very blessed to have so many opportunities, Christina. Like God has been good to me. Personally, I know that I worked to get to where I need to get to, but I have also been put in a more privileged position as a Black woman. But even with that, I still feel like it's just not good enough. Like it scares me sometimes that I'm put in certain positions, and I don't know if it's because of the fact that I am potentially a unicorn, because it's like I am the first of its kind, or if it's the pressure of being the first of her kind, or if it's, the imposter syndrome that we spoke about, where I just feel like, oh shit, like maybe I'm not good enough, like maybe this really isn't for me. So those are some of the questions that I've been asking myself when I am put on the table, or when I either put myself on the table or I am put on the table. But why do I shy away from shining if you don't make use of that opportunity? It's like almost as if there's like that small pressure where you cannot mess this opportunity up because, like, girl, not a lot of people have this. And that's also something that I wanted to speak about when it comes to not necessarily the imposter syndrome, but that pressure of you came out of the trenches, you can't mess up. And I think that's also the type of language that we got from our parents as well. Like our parents would be like, yeah, when we were young, it was difficult and therefore we're giving you the best, so you can't mess up. That you can't mess up is very stressful as well. Because like I said, like, yes, I have been given these opportunities, but I'm not allowed to fear. I'm not allowed to make mistakes. I'm not allowed to mess up. I have to keep fighting because I know that I'm not just fighting for myself, but I'm fighting for generations. And that's pretty hectic. That's pretty hectic, but it is what it is. It's not just you anymore, Yasmin. It's for everyone else. It's not just for the young Black people that don't have voices, but it's also for the white people that do have voices to see that there are Black people that do have voices. So, yeah.
I think what she says is extremely poignant, and I think, we really are spiritual beings and we depend upon the relationships for our survival. And this sense of exclusivity and separateness has just amplified these feelings of isolation and disconnect. And the consequence of that is a global mental health crisis of endemic proportions, as I've said. And I just feel this sense of divisiveness that actually is only to the great, great, great detriment to humanity and to our planet, actually. And I wanted to share with you a conversation that I had with a clinical psychologist, Natasha Nagin, really about relationships. And I'm just going to, I won't speak because I've put up the questions so you can just read them. I have to read them a bit quickly. And here you can listen to the conversation.
Yes, yes. And I think we've kind of set it up in such a way that people compete for everything, for resources, for attention, for success. And in the process of that competitiveness that exists, yes, I think that sometimes we are not aware or choose not to be aware of the consequences. So it's just about succeeding at whatever cost. But I think that it also then promotes scarcity mindset that exists in the world, where there's only a limited amount of resources that exist. And if I don't grab onto my share, I'm never going to get anything. So, it then leads to that sense of selfishness that I think comes out in how, whether it is individuals, families, societies, companies conduct themselves, where it's about me and mine and how can I protect it. And there isn't an ability to kind of transcend to a life of abundance where you kind of understand that there's enough, and if I share, there'll still be enough and it'll be okay. And I think it is concerning, because I think that it is being promoted, and you see it from a very young age. So now children, and the amount of pressure that exists with children and what they are expected to do. So it's no longer you go to school, you come home, you play, you do a little bit of homework, you spend time with your friends. It's kind of you go to school and then the extramurals. So you've got to be able to be proficient at all of these things and be successful and work probably even longer hours than parents do, because parents are often dropping kids off at school, going to work and then fetching them after their day of work. And yes, that doesn't exist in all facets of society, because it depends on your socioeconomic status and what's affordable. But certainly that idea of needing to compete constantly exists from when you're very young. I'm thinking that perhaps the starting point is for individuals, and then whatever that core component is of that system, to not be so self-absorbed, really. So whether you are an individual functioning in a family unit, for you to not be so self-absorbed and to understand that you're part of something bigger. Whether you are a company in a broader set of a discipline or an area, that you are more than just you. And sometimes simple enough in the sense that, I think if we embrace our humanness, then therein lies the answer. But I think it takes a lot of will, personal will, political will, to get that done. And I think that because we've kind of grown up in societies and cultures that consume, for one, has largely valued material gain as another, it becomes really difficult, because ideologically you can understand, or intellectually you can understand the importance of being able to share, being able to include. But I think when it comes down to actually doing it, I think that there are lots of fears that can kind of creep in and prevent us from doing that. I think it goes back to kind of having that scarcity mindset, and the fears that exist in believing that there are limited amounts. And sometimes it doesn't matter if even you see that there's more than you need. The idea is still there. And so I think it's going to take a lot of will and a lot of conscious effort to change, but it can be changed. I mean, most systems are set up in such a way that they will want to kind of maintain a sense of homeostasis and balance. It's just how systems are designed and created. And when we kind of break or want to break the system up into its individual parts, that's where it can't kind of work itself back into that balanced state. So even if you look at monoculture, I mean, if you are able to replenish the soil and allow for biodiversity, it can almost heal itself. Yeah, but our need to kind of commercially farm means that we decide, we control what happens, how it happens. And so the natural system can't be allowed to heal itself. To understand as an individual, what is your why? What is that motivation for you to do or choose what you do? And that question, I think, would be applicable irrespective of who's asking it. So whether it's the individual asking it, a company asking it, or a business asking it, a society asking it, a culture or a religious group asking it. Because I think that being able to be clear on your why means that you also have the capacity to then hold yourself accountable, because you should then understand your reasoning. I think it's a start, because how often do we engage in behaviors or activities or conversations without checking our why? I think that we adopt a lot of behaviors and ways of living without ever checking its relevance to us or its impact that it's going to have on the world at large. We just don't. We just kind of assume that this is how things get done, and so we adopt it, and so this is how things are going to get done. Because everybody else is doing it, or society demands it of us. And I think being able to stop just long enough, because I think in also being able to ask the question, and yes, it might sound very simplistic, I think that we also have to pause long enough to be able to ask the question of ourselves and be able to answer that question. And therein lies I suppose, a feedback loop that we create for ourselves that means that we've got to check in more consistently than just being on autopilot, I suppose.
And I think, yeah, when our systems are founded on the principles of interconnectedness, on reciprocity and mutual exchange, when we explore the gaps in between and embrace the shared opportunity, they respond with abundance, rather than creating that sense of exclusivity and separation. And I'd like to take on that theme of shared opportunity. In 2017, with Dora Marema, who was my partner in crime for many years, we set up a small college called the Green Business College. And this arose out of just seeing that there were so many people of all ages who, and also young people who were not really they didn't have the qualifications or the couldn't afford to go to university, had no interest, and yet they were sitting at home and not able to actually do much. And so our idea was like, what if we train people with very simple, not always simple, but practical skills that had a positive environmental impact alongside business, so that they could actually then set up their own business and earn an income. And so we were training in permaculture, which is obviously quite complicated, but beekeeping and vermicomposting, fruit and vegetable conservation and preservation, and making insulation bags, and really, so we would teach these skills, and then alongside these very practical business skills, connect them to sales channels, and we also offered mentor support and what have you. But when 2020 hit with COVID, well, obviously when South Africa or Johannesburg went into lockdown, we went into lockdown too, and our doors closed. And I was sitting there, I was just been in Johannesburg just before lockdown and got back to Switzerland, and one Saturday morning, actually, I was sitting there going, wow, I wonder what's going on. You know, our permaculture trainers were also smallholder farmers in around Johannesburg, producing really wonderful organic food. So I knew that they couldn't get their food to market because everything was shut down. But I also realized that people in the informal settlements who would normally be able to go off and get piece jobs where they would just, even if it would be enough to put food on the table, but they would not be able to be doing that. And so I contacted one of our permaculture trainers, Tim Abba, and asked him, what is the situation there? And he said, no, it's absolutely true. We're sitting on this produce that will go to waste. And I said, do you think it's possible to get this produce into the informal settlements? And he was like, yes, don't you worry, I'll make sure that happens. And so actually on that very same day, we came together and we produced a document, which then I shared to invite people that if they wanted to buy this produce, that we would actually take it into communities. But I knew very quickly this was just a first response. This was not a sustainable project in many ways. And so one way just to sort of like build in a bit of sustainability was that every box that we gave, people would receive 30 seedlings and some 10 kg of compost. Because most of the informal settlements, most people have, or everyone has a little bit of plot of land, where they can actually grow. And so this was just a way that they would actually be able to start, if they weren't already, growing their own vegetables. And we called this project the Ubuntu Project. And for me, Ubuntu is a word that really just resonates so deeply. And it because it speaks of our shared humanity. And it is the fact that I am because you are. And we really cannot separate ourselves. And so we started this project. And what we realized was that there were champions in the community that actually we could expand this project. Now we could get more people to grow their vegetables, and we actually started selling produce to people who could afford to pay for it. And every box that we sell, and it still continues today, every box that we sell, we donate 30 seedlings and 10 kg of compost to a community. So within a week, we've sold thousands of seedlings and hundreds of kilos of compost into a community. But we identified these champions, and I think this was really key. And we were given the opportunity to train them in business so that they could actually see that what they could do with the vegetables that they were producing. And we encouraged them to also produce seedlings because they were the seedlings we could buy and then actually pass on into other communities. But actually they could be selling seedlings within their own communities. They could be creating markets within their own communities. And today, actually, we are buying produce from some of these smallholder farmers because they're communities, and they are our suppliers. But they're also selling in other spaces as well. And I think that's the thing about shared opportunity and creating this. Everyone is able to benefit from it, and it isn't limited. Actually, there's always a potential. There is more that one can do. And from this project, and I saw the impact on communities, and just that sense of that they were able, that they could actually, with the little that they had, they could actually create something much greater. And I also the messages that one received from people was actually that this had meant so much to them personally on an emotional level, and that it had really in many ways saved their spirits. And it touched me in a way that because I do see, and I know in my own circle, in my working environment, in my family environment, we have seen really family and friends and work colleagues and what have you really facing mental health challenges. And it sort of like struck me that, I think there's something we really do need to sort of connect back into nature, because it really does feed you so much. And so I decided that I would start a project, and it's a pilot project. And that was really to create communication spaces. And my idea was to engage companies or organizations, communities, where you could take a piece of land that had been abandoned, or even land that belonged to a company or a community, small, where one would be able to regenerate the soil and create a forest of native species. And that forest would become not only a legacy for whoever had created it, but actually a space that would live on, where, as I say, a communication space, a space where nature could communicate with nature, but also people could communicate with nature, and a space where people could come together and communicate with one another. And so I started this pilot project, and as you can see, I started with land that was really, even weeds didn't want to grow there. It was really abandoned. And over months, every day with my wheelbarrow, just putting in nutrients, whether it be algae or compost or manure or straw or even cardboard, we were just putting layer upon layer upon layer. And, you know, it was just sort of, and obviously having to water it. But that started in April. And then at the end of this year, which is after Christmas, is my birthday, so it's a good time to sort of reflect. No? And I was in the little forest, which we have planted. You can't really see, but because they're very small. And I was just sort of digging in the soil, and I realized, wow, you know, it's not what's above, it's what's below. This soil that had started to regenerate, all of the elements that had come together. It wasn't about me. I had done some part, absolutely. But it was all the nutrients that had gone in. It was the sun, it was the rain, it was the birds, it was the insects, it was the worms, it was the mycelium, that all of these, just even the earth that was already existing there, all of these elements had come together. Elements that you could see, elements that you couldn't see. They'd come together and they had regenerated this land. And it was so funny, you know, I started off thinking that this project would actually, you know, I was thinking about how it would be able to transform and what have you. And I really realized that as I had worked on the soil had worked on me. And I do feel that many of us we've lost our way, and yet I do believe that if we can come together and have these conversations and engage one another, not to divide, but actually to nudge, to embrace, to see the gaps, to see the spaces in between, that we will be able to find a way forward and to create systems that are sustaining, because they already exist. And I think something that really sort of touched me, which I read not long ago, and it is the fact that the land knows you even when you are lost. And so I think we have a really wonderful guide. We just need to take a step back and listen. So thank you so much. And I really look forward to listening to everyone's conversations here. And I just wish everyone very safe and enjoyable time. Thank you so much.